Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We have an exciting topic for you today. We're going to talk about governance, but not just regular governance, because I know a lot of people, when they hear that word, they feel like things are about to slow down, and that's not what people are hoping for right now. I think people want speed as AI approaches, and as clean core becomes an important concept with SAP. People are realizing that there's a lot more agility that is required. I now have a lot of side-by-side extensions. I'm not just making changes to SAP, but I'm making changes to side-by-side extensions, could be in BTP or other applications. Everything's in the cloud, so it's really important that we are able to take advantage of fast changes so we can be more responsive to business requirements. But we can't lose the safety that we're accustomed to when it comes to SAP. So we've actually written a few blogs on this topic. We're going to be posting a new article today on LinkedIn, so look out for that. I'll show you where you can get that in a minute. And then we'll have another one later this week just to kind of complete that series. But certainly it's a big focus for us to really think about how you can do smart governance. And there's a lot of aspects to it, which I'm going to share as we go through this. And then I'm going to turn it over to Dominic Moladamy, who's one of our Core ALM expert architects on the subject of Application Lifecycle Management across the board. And he's going to walk us through a demonstration of how you can actually implement this improved smart governance approach directly from ServiceNow, managing your SAP changes with no dependency on Solution Manager or even Cloud ALM. So let's talk about that. Before I get into things, just a little bit of background on who we are as Core ALM. So Core ALM's been in business for about 15 years. The company was started when our CEO and founder left his position at SAP. Many of our team worked together at SAP before Core ALM existed. And 15 years ago, he saw a really kind of a gap in the marketplace. There was no company that was directly positioned in that sweet spot of application lifecycle management focus, 100%, and specifically for SAP customers, and decided that we can provide services, in that space. And there were a lot of customers that had demand for those types of services. And so that's when, Core ALM was kind of born. And then from there, it was about 2018, when he sort of saw the opportunity, because many of the customers that were using SAP ALM tools at the time, it was primarily Solution Manager that was available, but a few other testing tools and other applications that did exist. But what we noticed is that although people use Solution Manager to manage their ALM processes for SAP, there were a lot of other tools that got used for other applications that are in the customer's landscape. So, of course, anybody that runs SAP has other applications that they run alongside of SAP. Could be Salesforce, could be your digital front end, custom applications, now a lot of cloud-based applications that require integrations with SAP. And for those other applications, there's other tools that are being used. ServiceNow is very common for governance and change control overall. Jira and Azure DevOps sometimes get used for change management, but also very often used to manage projects and more complex work efforts. And if you look at it, there's a lot of overlap. So we really saw an opportunity to build software to actually connect Jira, Azure DevOps, and ServiceNow with the best ALM tools that are available from SAP, so that you can have one consistent process. And I'm going to talk more about that. But, of course, that really kind of got us going on the software side and accelerated our journey in the SAP ALM space. We've been serving some of SAP's biggest customers. We cover across industries. So, we cover everything from like high security financial environments, where, obviously security is paramount. We also cover regulated industries, could be defense, it could be pharma or life sciences, where there's a requirement for FDA or some validated process. So of course, governance and audit ability is very important in all of our processes. And that includes, as a vendor, we have to qualify, with those large enterprises for their strict, requirements for vendor compliance. So we've passed through all of that. Of course, we also have smaller customers and point solutions that we offer many of these customers. When they come on board with us, they use our software, and they become customers for life. So that tends to be the way that we work with our customers. Be happy to get into more case studies and some success stories that we've had with some of those. But today, what I want to talk about is just to step back a little bit before we dive into the subject deeply on governance. I want to talk a little bit about what is business transformation overall as it relates to SAP and non-SAP. And the way we always think about this is that, business transformation is a continuous cycle. And so it never really ends. Many people are in the journey of S4. They just recently implemented S4. You're planning S4. You're in the middle of an S4 implementation. And that's obviously a big transformation that you're making. But either way, there's ongoing continuous improvements that have to be made. Sometimes the initial implementation of S4 doesn't have everything that you need. And so there's this need to do continuous innovation. And the more we can make this a DevOps style or an agile process where you can have continuous innovation, the better, because business is not standing still, especially with emerging technologies such as AI. There's more and more pressure to innovate more quickly. And it's a closed loop system, or at least it should be. That's the opportunity. We see that every business transformation starts first. It should start with process improvement planning. So the first thing you should be looking at is, what is my current business practice? How can I get benefits by making modifications or changes or improvements to that business process? And let's start at the process improvement level first. And that means that it's going to be a business-driven change. Sometimes you have just technical upgrades that need to be done, but most of the changes have the ability to attach to some kind of business benefit. And even if you're doing a technical upgrade, it should be clear what the business impacts are to your business process areas. Then, of course, the next stage is managing the projects and maintaining the solution. So you have to develop and do some testing on those. And there's a lot of activities associated with that you need to keep track of, and a lot of people that need to be kept in the loop. And then last is, you need to take that solution that you've built and you need to deploy it. And maybe, sometimes you only have one landscape or one set of landscapes, dev, QA, and production, or it could be that you have many parallel landscapes that you have to maintain. So deployment covers all of that. And then, of course, you have to operate and continue to support that application and maintain it, making sure that everything, ideally, and this is the closed loop part, you're closing the loop to make sure that you get the benefits that you sought to achieve from the beginning when you started that project. And then based on the ongoing operations and the new feedback and metrics that you set, you can monitor to see how well you've achieved the goals that you set up for yourself. And then you go back to the start and you identify the next opportunity and go back through the cycle again. So that's why we see it. This really should be the case whether you're doing a big business transformation project, whether you're doing a system upgrade project. We have good stories of how we can actually save a lot of time and money on system upgrades just by being focused on the business process and doing some optimization on your test planning based on what you know of how you're using it. And then even maintenance updates, small changes that you have to make from day to day to continue to improve and to keep your solution active and supporting your users properly. So that's the continuation innovation cycle. The challenge is that there's many tools. There's capabilities that you need to do each one of these steps in the process. And for each of those steps in the process and all of those capabilities, there's many different tools that you can utilize. So from SAP, you have tools like Cloud ALM that covers the majority, Solution Manager, which is going away, but still covers many of those capabilities, and many of our customers continue to run Solution Manager capabilities. So those tools are good at helping SAP companies manage those steps in the process. SAP, of course, has other tools such as Tricentis, Signavio for the business process side, Tricentis more for the change impact analysis, test automation stuff, performance testing. But there's also tools that are being used by the rest of the enterprise for non-SAP applications like Jira, Azure DevOps, ServiceNow, as I mentioned. And so what that does, because there's so much overlap between these tools, it kind of creates some conflict. And so what we see is a lot of customers, maybe make some changes in or keep track of their changes in ServiceNow, but also use Charm or also use transport management capabilities in SAP. And sometimes they have to manually duplicate effort to maintain a consistent bit of information across those different tools. This leads to inefficiencies in the process. It's very hard to automate the process because there's so many manual steps involved and disconnected process. And worst case, it leads to a distinct process for SAP versus non-SAP. And the truth is, we want everything together in one bucket, because if we have everything together, then we can look at changes holistically. And that's the way we should be thinking about changes. It's an end-to-end change. It's not just SAP or non-SAP. It's here's my business process. It spans across these applications, and I need to make sure that everything moves in sync. So what we do as Core ALM is we provide that unification layer to bring all of this together. So we kind of create a bridge between those applications so that businesses can design a process that can be automated, that is synchronized across all of the applications that the companies are using, and gives everybody a consistent process for SAP, non-SAP, where everybody gets the same version of the truth, regardless of which tool it is that they choose to use for each of these different capabilities. That's our mission. And for that, we have different products. We have the Solution Manager products, which are still active today. So if you're on Solution Manager and you want to connect, you can do that today. Cloud ALM, we have connectors for those as well. And that helps, but Cloud ALM isn't fully at the level of capability that Solution Manager was in the past. And so we've created a new option, a third option, which is direct transport management. And that allows customers to directly control SAP transport. So you're kind of getting the benefits of SAP Charm, which is part of Solution Manager, directly in Jira, Azure DevOps, or ServiceNow. And then you can actually have your process without, still getting the benefit of the SAP integrations, all of the standard checks and robustness that you would expect from Charm, but using the existing tools. And then you can have a consistent process across all of your applications, SAP or non-SAP. The other aspect to consider is, what you can do to automate. And this is why governance, people think of it's going to be like put up red lights and slow you down from actually doing the wrong thing. And of course, that is true. We want to make sure that we prevent bad changes from getting into production. But we also want to accelerate good changes. And the way we can do that is by looking at the process overall and have an example of a typical workflow that shows the different states that you would go through at the top in blue. That shows you, the standard states that you would go through to approve a change into production. But in addition to that, we can take that information as to where we are in the process, and we can automatically trigger some automations that will accelerate that process by early detection of issues. So for instance, we could take our code when it's ready to be tested. We can run through analysis automatically as part of an automated pipeline where we do vulnerability checks or code quality analysis to make sure we're adhering to our coding standards. I can also manage, external source code repositories and double check to make sure there's no conflict between work that's being done on multiple different landscapes. When it's the change is initially tested by the developer, I can run my own additional automated testing. I can do change impact analysis to understand the level of risk associated with that change. So I can right-size the governance, and I don't have to put maximum governance on a small, low-risk change. So this helps me to understand, and that can be done with tools like Tricentis Live Compare. I can also run test automation against my suites. We've helped people in a period of like 5 months to fully automate their regression testing. So every time they make a change in their CAB review, they already have automated test results that say these are the issues that have been encountered as a result of those changes, even before they get to their CAB meeting. So that's some benefits that you can get by accelerating. There's more listed here. I'm just kind of going quickly. And there's many other synchronizations that you can do, including making sure that when you manage changes, you're not just doing an SAP change over here and a non-SAP change over here, but you package together in one change the SAP side of the change, as well as any BTP side-by-side extensions or cloud-based changes that you're making, as well as even non-SAP code changes if you're, let's say, changing a middleware or making code changes on your far-end application. You can have that all packaged into a single change request, and you can manage that through an automated pipeline. So these are some benefits that can be achieved through the use of kind of more of a modern pipeline-style governance approach. I'm just putting some links up on the screen. Thanks for joining us here today. You probably heard about this through either our emails or our website, or potentially through LinkedIn as well. In the top left corner of your screen, you'll see the SAP ALM Navigator, which is our weekly newsletter where we cover topics. We have, like I said, we have exciting topics that we come out on a weekly basis. This week, we're going to be publishing 2 articles on change governance. So if this topic is of interest to you, you should subscribe to that newsletter, which you can do on LinkedIn, and then you'll get notifications as well for future updates. Our resources page on our website, bottom left corner of your screen, will give you access to upcoming webinars. And if you want to speak to us directly to get more of a tailored demonstration of how this can work for you, or if you'd like to do an actual proof of concept where you can actually see how this would run in your environment, then you can reach out to us. There's no charge. The best way is scan the barcode on the bottom right corner of your screen, or go to our website, corealm.com, and click on the Talk to an Expert button in the top right corner, fill out the form, and then we can get involved and help you. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce my guest for today. That is Donik Molademy. Donik, welcome to the webinar.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, Steve. My name is Donik Molademy. I'm ALM architect here at Core ALM. And let me go ahead and share my screen. And Steve, can you confirm that you can see the ServiceNow screen?
Yes, I can. Looks good. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much. So what we're going to be looking at today, as Steve mentioned, is that we're going to look at a product that's really going to bring together the management of SAP transports. It's going to bring it together with a ServiceNow process and all the governance that's built around your current process. We will talk about, we're going to look at an example today. I'm going to take you through the process of creating a change all the way to deploying it to production, and during which we will see some conditions that must be true before certain activities can be executed. And essentially this, how the change request is going to guide us by, guide us all the way to production with all the guidelines that have been put in, all the guardrails, and the governance process that's in place. So Core ALM's tool, once it's deployed in ServiceNow, what will happen is it'll bring in certain functionality that's available in ServiceNow. And that functionality, for example, it's going to be actions that you would normally execute when managing transports in SAP, such as creating a transport, creating a task, creating and importing TOCs, releasing transports, and so forth. So what we're doing in this case, in the demo that we're going to look at today, we're going to look at a normal change. So when we look at a normal change, typically you have, these are out-of-the-box statuses, but our tool is flexible to really adapt to any change type that you currently use. So if you have any change type that's currently customized, you have additional governance compared to what comes out of the box. And if any workflows that you have built, we will be able to mesh and integrate into those processes and add further controls, such as the actions that control transports and other validations and other transport checks. So in this case, when we look at what we're going to look at today is we're going to see a change. So as it's going through statuses from new to assess and authorize, In status assess, we have set up and we've said that we're going to bring in a specific TMS actions, as we mentioned, like refresh, create transports, creating tasks, and so forth. And they're all going to apply to the assess status. So while the change request is in this status, we will be able to see these buttons. However, we have additional validations built in and additional governance to kind of say that certain events must happen in specific order. So it's not like we can just wildly click these buttons, but you're guided in the process as to what logically is able to be created next, along with any other configurations that you have in ServiceNow. As I look at the change, we're going to spend quite a bit of time in the state assess, and then I'll describe all of the transport actions, the controls, and everything that we will be able to do while we're in those statuses. So what I'm going to do now is just brief introduction as to how this can be configured. Now, all these buttons, this configuration screen, we can change things dynamically. So if you add a status, we can come back in here, add additional buttons to a specific status. So it's very easy to redesign the buttons and actually say these buttons apply to the specific status. In addition to that, these buttons can also be controlled with security roles in ServiceNow, and those are delivered by our tool. So essentially, we can say, even though we're in assess, a developer can only create a transport and release, for example. And then release managers are responsible for importing them. So we can also separate those actions by security roles, in addition to mapping them to the status. Okay, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new change. And this is just a standard, a normal change in ServiceNow. The workflow is pretty much out of the box, except that we have added the configuration for our tool, for the Core LM's tool, which will bring together the transport management system. But essentially what we are going to do is just go ahead and populate some of the fields to begin that process. In your case, for example, if you have custom fields that are added, if you have any restrictions based on, whether the fields are mandatory or not, or certain values must be respected, none of that will be impacted by adding the transport management integration tool. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and add a description, and I'm just going to call it webinar September 3rd. Oh. Wrong location, okay, September 3rd. And then I'm going to assign this change to a particular assignment group. And then any other information that I would have to fill out normally in your process, all of that would still apply. And I'm going to just change some of the criticality just to spice up our dashboards. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and commit the change. So now we have, I'm going to go back, I'm going to go to full screen here so we get a little bit more real estate. But essentially, while in status new, we can go ahead and make certain assessment, whatever is required. But what I want to get your attention to is we're introducing a field called SAP Change. And this is essentially our trigger point and as to when we want to distinguish between a normal enterprise-wide change versus an SAP change. So this will be essentially our branching point to say that this particular ticket is going to have some SAP steps involved in it, not just the traditional change that is available. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a sore throat, so I'm having to go on mute quite often, so I apologize. So essentially, once we set the value to yes, we will see a new tab that pops up, and that tab is essentially going to contain all the buttons that we discussed earlier, and they will appear only when specific conditions are correct. The value of this field can be set, based on another field. It can be set manually or an assignment group. So essentially, we're just displaying it here so you know and you realize that this is going to be slightly different process from a regular change in your environment because it contains SAP steps. So once we set the SAP change to yes, we're going to get the SAP Transport tab. However, if you recall in status new, we said that there are no actions that apply to status new, therefore we don't see any buttons. However, if we switch the status to assess, and if you recall, we mentioned that most or all of these buttons will be applicable in assess. What you'll notice that once we go to the SAP Transport tab, we will notice buttons that apply to the current conditions. For example, we're in status assess, we don't have any transports created yet, which means that we can, at this point, we can create a transport, or if we have one in our ABAP system, we can couple one with this particular change request. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and create a new transport. For the description of the transport, I'm going to enter the same as the description of the change. I'm going to pick my development system. In this case, my development system could be an ABAP system, like an S4. It could be a BW system, or it could be other change type. But in this case, we're just going to go with an ABAP change. And we also have the ability to select the change types that we want to create in that system. So, for example, if we don't know whether we need customizing and workbench, because maybe we are somebody that's assigning work to developers, but developers and configurators know exactly what they need, we have the ability to create both change types. In this case, I'm going to create just a customizing request, and then I'm going to provide the username or portion of the name of the user that I want to assign it to. So I could provide portion of the first name, last name, email address. All those will be pulled directly from the backend system, in this case, our ABAP system. And then we can assign one or more tasks. And then in addition to that, we're also providing the capability to stop this change from progressing. For example, if we have manual steps before the transport is imported, we can select that, mention the manual steps. And then anytime you go and import this particular transport in a system, whether it's QA, pre-production, or production system, you're going to get a pop-up to remind you, and it's going to ask for you to acknowledge to say that, yes, these steps have been completed. This way, it gives us the capability to capture any manual steps. For the other scenario today, I'm not going to go ahead and create any of those steps because we want to get through the demo, and we want to be able to see the governance that's put in place as we move the transport through all the way to production. So the speed is not important here, so we want to move as quickly as possible. So what you will see now is that in ServiceNow directly, without ever going into an ABAP system, now I do have a transport which ends in number 1167. It's a customizing assigned to the user Donic. It's a modifiable status, and then the description of the transport. If I were to pull up my ABAP system where I created the change, so the system was TRI, and we have multiple clients here to represent different landscapes. So for example, 050 is my development client. In this case, if I go and see for transports that are assigned to me, I'm going to be able to see a list, and one of those should be transport with number 1167. So if we expand 1167, we will see that it has the description webinar September 3rd. That's what we initially added, but we're also adding to the description the change request number that initiated this transport. So in this case, we will have a relationship between change request number 341 with the transport, also in the ABAP system. So if anybody looks at this transport, they'll know that it's associated to this change request in ServiceNow. In addition to the transport, I also have a task with number 1168, and we can see the details of the task down here. So typically, as a configurator or a developer, I would go into my ABAP system, I would perform a change, and I would capture it to a transport, and then I would release a task. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and release the task without capturing any objects, because as I mentioned, we just want to move the transport itself. We don't really care about the content at this point. But what I'm going to do is, if you recall, I released the task. And when we come back to ServiceNow, For example, if you look at it now, we'll see that we don't have a button called create transport or create TOC, create and import TOC. And the reason for that is that ServiceNow was not aware that this task was released. So once the task is released, we can now create and import TOC. What this means is that unless certain conditions are correct, we're not going to allow the change to progress forward. So what does that mean in terms of governance? In terms of governance, that means that we're going to make sure that along the way, the point is not to slow you down, but we're going to make sure that you're going to, cross all the T's and dot all the I's. And only when all the conditions are correct, we will be able to proceed forward. So in this case, because a developer is done with their changes and they have released the task, that means that the transport essentially, it's not released, but you cannot make changes and capture there because there are no tasks available. This means that we can take a snapshot of the transport by creating and importing a TOC and sending it to QA. So what's going to happen now when the conditions are correct? I'm going to go back to my transport buffers, refresh my buffer and go all the way to the end. And what we should see now is that we have a TOC, and let me refresh the screen here, and we'll see the relationship here in just a second. So what we have is we have a TOC that was created in client 050. It was exported and running to client 060, which is our QA client. And it's a TOC from the original transport 1167, along with the change. So what we have essentially done is we've taken a snapshot of the transport from development and taken a snapshot to the QA system. And we can see that now we have a transport, we have a task, and then we have a TOC number of the change that was sent to QA. We can perform our testing QA, and if we are happy with the results, we can then choose to release the transport. Excuse me. We can choose to release the transport. Otherwise, we can go back and create more tasks and perform additional changes and then create additional TOCs until we are happy with our testing in QA. But what's important here is to realize that certain buttons do not show up until the conditions are correct. For example, what we're noticing here is that there is no import TR or import transport button. That the reason is because the transport is still modified. However, if we release the transport, the release process will begin. Some elements about the transport and the objects in the transport will be checked, and then the transport will be released. So what I'm going to do is, as the checks are happening, I'm just going to give it a second, and then I'm going to refresh my buffer, and you will notice that upon release, the actual transport has now been released. Initially, it was the TOC. Now we have the actual transport. And if we come into ServiceNow, we will notice the same. We will notice that all the pieces from this change have been released. And because the transport is now released, we see that other buttons go away, but the import transport button is available, because that's the next logical step that you can perform. So these buttons can also be controlled, as we mentioned earlier, can be controlled by the conditions that we've set, meaning the condition and the status of the transport. But in addition to that, it could depend on the user that's logged in. So for example, if I'm a developer, at this point, I will not be able to see the import transport button. And essentially, we can choose and say that only release manager or only basis has access to the import button. So then what it would mean is multiple conditions have to be correct. For example, the ticket has to be in the correct status. Whatever values we decide that need to be correct, the conditions of the transport has to be correct in the correct state, and the user has to be the correct user before they can execute this particular action. Now, because you have access to ServiceNow to execute this action, that does not mean that you'll be able to see the button if you do not have access. If this particular user does not have access in the backend system, in this case in the OPOP system, if they don't have access to import transport, the authorization object, they will still not see the button. So even though all the conditions are correct in ServiceNow, We want to make sure that that user is actually able to execute that action. So from that perspective, there are several layers that are built into the tool from a governance perspective, controls perspective. And obviously, the idea is not to make things difficult, but to make it easy by clearly defining the path that the change must take, by clearly notifying you that, you know, these fields are out of compliance, these are the things that need to be fixed, and then you can move forward. So as we are in the process here, because I'm the administrator, I'm allowed to essentially execute all of these activities. But due to the sake of time, I didn't want to have to log out and log in as every user, so that's why I'm using the administrator. But in this case, we have exported the change from development system, and we are happy with the results. So the next logical step is for us to initiate the import of the transport into the QA system. This step can be automated, can be driven by batch jobs. So as soon as the transport is released, it's added to the buffer of QA. We can automate that step. However, for today's demo, we're just leaving every step manual, just so to see that we have the control. But keep in mind that we can always automate these steps based on a certain value, based on specific conditions or status. Similar to a TMS, once you initiate an import of a transport to any system, we will have the options to select, just like you do in the TMS. So whatever options we select, those will be recorded. But in this case, I'm not going to select anything. I'm just going to initiate the import of transport. And then certain activities, as I mentioned before, will be executed. And we will talk about those activities here in just a second as this step completes. Okay, so once I refresh my buffer, what we expect to see is that the change has been imported into the QA system. And then we can see that the same transport has gone into the buffer of client 099, which is our production system. But no import steps have been performed yet. And the transport is sitting and waiting to be imported in the buffer. Okay, so because we have imported the transport into QA and we are in status assess, we no longer have the ability to import the transport because all the necessary actions have been executed up until this point. So really the only thing that we can do here is either go forward and approve the change and get all the additional approvals that are needed, or we can go back to in development, create more transports and add more changes to this particular change request. However, once all the transports, and in this case, we can have one or more transports here. Like I mentioned, we can have an S4 and a BW transport in parallel, so they both get imported to their respective systems together, because sometimes we have such dependencies. But in this case, we're just looking at one transport, but once all the conditions are correct, we're going to go ahead and approve the change, which will take us forward in the process. As mentioned before, any approvals that you have built in, any SOX compliance, any GXP, any validation steps that you have built in, any automation, all that will remain intact. And if necessary, we'll just add additional conditions that also tie to the status of the transport, if it applies. Otherwise, we just proceed as usual. We approve this change. In this case, we have two approvals built in. One is in the assess and one is in authorize, and then we get to the scheduled status. If you recall the beginning of the meeting, we mentioned that most of the buttons are in the assess state, but then we have some buttons attached to, or some actions attached to implement. Typically in implement, we will see the import to production, and then post-implement, maybe in review, we have some other steps that relate to post-processing, like retrofitting and any advanced features that we might have. But because we are in scheduled, we're not going to see any other buttons except refreshing the status of this particular transport, because sometimes QA can be refreshed, right? And we want to make sure that we have the transport is in the system before it'll let us proceed forward. So in this case, that's why we are able to refresh and update the status. But in this case, nothing has changed in the backend. And what we're going to do is we're going to switch to implement status. And then as expected, in implement, what we should see upon selecting the transport, we will see the import transport button because I am the authorized user that it's supposed to execute this action. The transport has been imported into QA. The transport is released, obviously. All the conditions are correct. We are in implement status. And because of all the conditions have been met, I can now import the change into production. And in this case, similar to before, if I had the manual steps depicted here, I would see the pop-up with the options, and the manual steps would have been listed here. And then similar to QA, I will go ahead and import this change into production. And if I bring my ABAP system and refresh it, again, as mentioned before, there are certain checks happening. Some automations are happening to ensure that the transport can go into the next system. And I'll describe all of those activities here in just a second. So a change has made it all the way to production. We then can put it in status review. While in status review, we have additional buttons that apply. For example, retrofit analysis. So we're going to analyze this change and say, does this apply for retrofit, and does it need to be retrofitted into an M+1 environment if you had a project landscape built in? Not every customer does, but in case you do, we'll perform an analysis. And in this case, we don't have any objects in the change, so there's no retrofitting to be done. And once we can then try to close the change, fill out all the mandatory field, and we can then close the request. And the change has gone all the way to production. So with the governance that's built in, we give you the guardrails, or ServiceNow provides the guardrails to really keep us focused and keep the process focused, have all the fields, all the mandatory fields, and then all the SAP related items built into the tool, into your process. So essentially, we have questions where customers ask us, well, can I run a report to find out the transports that are not following our change convention? So usually our goal to respond to that is that, well, you should never be out of compliance. You should never have transport that are out of compliance, because the only way to create them is if they've been approved, if they go through the rigor. That's the only way they're going to make it to production. So that's the governance that's built into the tool, along with the ServiceNow tools with notifications. But in addition to that, what I want to get your attention to is things like auditing and the quality of the transports that are going to production. And these are the additional things that we are built into the tool and that we have brought in. So in terms of transport checks, if you had noticed during the process, we have certain indicators here that are indicating success in this case. But what this means is that we are checking for the cross system object locking. So essentially, we're keeping track of every object from the moment it gets created or captured into a transport all the way until it's deployed to production. We're keeping track of it to make sure that there are no conflicts. When two people are modifying the same objects, certainly, depending on how fast you go, one of them could end up in production sooner than the other. Therefore, we have checks that are downgrade protection. We have that built in to make sure that we're not going to downgrade each other's work, and we're going to make sure that the objects go into production in the order that they were generated in the development system. In addition to that, we have a cross-reference check where we want to make sure that we check for objects and check for failures before importing the transport to make sure that everything is in the correct order before performing an import. So these are the shift left automations, some of the automations that we are performing to make sure that the transports that are going to production have gone through some checks. In addition to that, you can build in APC checks from code quality, and those can also be built into the process to say that besides these checks, also other criteria must be met and must have a successful return code or a successful analysis before we can proceed forward. And then last but not least, and often is the most important piece, is the audit. So if you noticed in the beginning, we created a change. And in the notes section of the change request, everything will be captured as the ticket was, every field that was updated, all those changes will be captured here. including the SAP steps. So now when you look at a change, you see the change, its entire life cycle. You see from its creation to the point where we created the transport, the email notifications were sent out, I refreshed the status at some point, we created a TOC. So we're notifying you that we initiated the TOC creation, we're calling the backend system, we refreshed, and we we essentially got the details of the TOC that was imported into the QA system. In this case, we can see that the TOC was created earlier. Now we imported it into the system, client, by which user, which options. If you recall, we didn't select any, but if we had selected any of the options, the checkboxes, it would be here. The process was executed synchronously, and then the cross-reference check, the cross-system object locking, and sequence checks were executed for that TOC. Since everything passed, the import of the TOC was successful in client 060. And then for every action that we took, I'm not going to go into detail, but essentially as applicable, we're performing specific checks upon release of the transport. We're making sure that everything is intact. Upon import of transport, we're checking the next system. So regardless of how many systems you have in your landscape, whether you have a pre-production or more systems ahead of production, all of those can be built into the tool, and it's very, very flexible. We then take the approvals in ServiceNow, and then once we reach the status implement, we see that it was from schedule to implement. We then we initiated the import of the transport. The import has been executed and always executing all the checks. And then the retrofit analysis was performed, and then we closed the request. So with this change, at least, I was hoping to show how we can govern a change, how we can build very robust governance around it, but then we capture all the details along the way. So auditors, so you can be confident that once you build a robust process, that when auditors look at the notes, everything is captured and they should not have additional questions regarding that change. So besides managing a change, we provide a bunch of other features with the tool, like the ability for us, for example, to have dashboards. So in this case, we're going to take a look at the dashboard. As you can imagine, we can report on changes already. Standard ServiceNow can provide us all kinds of details and metrics for the changes in our system. However, when we look at the transport-related data, we can now see details about the transports in our environment. For example, we can see how many transports we have in the system, the transport buffers. These are just widgets that we have built, but there's a lot of flexibility now to build pretty much any widget you want, because all the data is going to be available in service. Data like change request numbers, the project that they're associated, the description, the transport numbers, everything is going to be related. And then different breakdowns, different queries that we can build. But what I want to get to is the ability of these dashboards to be clickable and actually essentially jump into a different area of the application. And in this case, for example, we have isolated changes that are in status implement, that are ready to go to production, that match this criteria. However, I want to import changes based on projects. So for example, I have a weekly maintenance release that I want to process now. We also have a change for a different project that I do not want to process now. However, I want to process these three. Whatever method I use for filtering and finding my changes, but once I select my changes, we can perform additional actions. We can perform things like execute mass retrofit if it makes sense. We can execute repack, going from project to the maintenance landscape. We can also execute a test import. So for example, CAB approves the changes, basis has, in 3 hours, we're going to execute an import. What I can do as a basis person, come in here, execute a test import, just to make sure that all the objects, I have all the prerequisites met, and there's going to be no issues during the import of this change. Now, there can always be issues during import, right? Because the system could run out of space, but essentially we're doing as much as we can ahead of time. And then if we perform the import and we like the results, and then when the time comes, we can just execute the import. We can trigger the import into production, and then the change request, they'll get triggered. They'll go in the correct queues, and then we'll see some of the requests that we have here. Upon refreshing, we will see that these changes, they already got imported into production, and then those changes will go away because they have been imported into production. So that's what we wanted to encapsulate today and on today's call, and just and then the webinar, just to kind of give you an idea of what the tool looks like and some of the capabilities. And we haven't covered all of them, but at least give you an idea of what it looks like.
Exactly. Thanks, Anakin. I'll give your voice a rest. I'm sorry that we're making you speak so much with a sore throat, but you got through it very well. I will remind everyone that if you have a question that you want to ask me or Dominic, feel free to put that into the chat. We do have some questions that have already been entered, so we'll start with those, but please enter your questions into the chat if you have anything. Dominic, this question came in early. I think you covered it a couple times, but maybe you can just summarize the question. First question is around segregation of duties. How do I make sure that, let's say, somebody can't release their own transport and control, who has access to do those different steps in SAP?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so on the SAP side, we can certainly control actions like with authorization profiles and authorization objects as far as who can create, who can import, and who can release transport and so forth. That's a granularity that we have. However, in ServiceNow, we also have the capability, as I mentioned, we have several layers. One, we can map the buttons to a specific status. Then layer number 2 could be the conditions to say, for example, if the owner of the transport equals to, for example, the developer, the release button will not appear for them. So it's just this minor configuration in our tool to where we just say, hey, if these conditions are met, the button shows up. Conversely, we can say, if these conditions are not met, do not display this button. So we have full control by controlling the button. And then we can also build roles to say my role is as a developer has access to these specific buttons. So we have full flexibility, and we try to build this truly like Lego pieces, and then we can build our figurine however we want. But the flexibility is there to quickly roll those out. But it's just going to depend on how much stringency you want to build in.
Okay, perfect. Totally makes sense. Thanks for that. Next question is just really, how does this get installed? What's involved? Is a client, do they do the installation themselves? Do we help out? And then how long does it usually take to get everything set up and configured?
Okay, maybe you can help me with some of the timelines and things, sure. But as far as technically, the way the tool is deployed, we will give you a transport for the ABAP side. That will have all the logic and the programs built in necessary to perform all those checks. And then on the ServiceNow side, you will be able, once approved, to download the plugin from the ServiceNow store. After it's certified, you'll be able to download it and deploy it in your environment. And then we would determine what the process would be during implementation. And then we would show you how you would integrate those into your process, essentially. Yeah, and then how long are we allowed to do the work or not? So Steve, maybe you can help us.
Sure, I can add some color, and thanks for mentioning the ServiceNow certification. It is important to understand for all of our customers that this is a certified application that ServiceNow reviews and approves. It's available for download. The plugin on the ServiceNow side is available in the ServiceNow store. By the way, we also have a similar application that's available for Jira if you're using Jira for your projects or ADO, and the products work well together, so you can have a combination where you do your projects in Azure DevOps and you do your regular maintenance changes in ServiceNow. They all use the same backend, so same code gets installed on your SAP environment, and And then, of course, you can manage the front end changes using both tools. We've been talking mostly about ABAP transports, but of course, this works for cloud-based transports as well, whether you're using public cloud or if you have cloud-based SAP applications or even BTP extensions, side-by-side extensions, you can manage transports through CTMS, directly from ServiceNow or Azure DevOps or Jira as well. And in terms of the time frame, it really only takes a couple of days to install and configure the application, the integrations. Where we spend time with customers is really just mapping out that process. We generally recommend a kind of a crawl, walk, run approach. So we try to start with something that's pretty close to the way you do business today in your existing, change management process. We add in the extra controls for SAP and allow you to actually manage your transports directly from the existing process. So that is, the way we would tend to start. And then, of course, you can layer in additional shift left automations that we've discussed, automated testing, change impact analysis, code quality analytics, or any other application that you want to kind of do to accelerate your implementation. So that is all possible. In terms of the time frame to actually get that work done, what I would say is that it depends on the time it takes for the full review with the team. We generally start with a tailored demonstration. So that's the first part. And then after that tailored demonstration, we would go into more of like a proof of concept where we're diving deeper into the actual process. That usually takes 2 sessions of about 2 hours each. I would say 4 hours in total to get through everything. And that way you can make sure before you make any commitments that we can cover 100% of the scenarios that you're looking to do. All of your requirements are sort of covered and captured. And that's kind of a checklist to make sure that this is going to meet your needs. And then once that's done, we would go into the actual implementation approach. And again, I would say overall, if you look at the full length of time, and usually this is driven by the customer's calendar of how long it'll take for them to get all of those people on their side assembled, give us security access so that we can help with the administration side of things. The total elapsed time tends to be, from 2 to 4 weeks. So if people know exactly what it is that they want, we can go much quicker, of course, but I would say 4 weeks is kind of a good average. So that covers the topic that we wanted to do today. As I mentioned, governance is an important topic. We do have many blogs and information that we can share with you. I'll put these barcodes back up on the screen so you can get back in touch with us. SAP ALM Navigator is our weekly publication on LinkedIn that you can subscribe to that, and you'll be notified for any upcoming articles. The resources tab in the bottom left corner, that barcode will take you to our upcoming webinar, so you could subscribe to new topics there. And then if you want to reach out to us, talk to an expert, link at the bottom right corner of the screen, we'll take you there. Thank you all for staying all the way till the end. And for those of you that are watching this on a recording, again, thanks for listening. Don't hesitate to reach out, and we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Thank you very much, Donna. Have a great rest of your day.